everything you need to know in a very condensed short version on aged care. What we want to do is go through and I'll break it up into 3 sections. So I think probably the most valuable use of the time today is to try to give you an idea of what the business opportunities are, why this is such an important area and how you can really expand your business opportunities in this particular area as well. So I want to go through and talk about just the aged care trends, why the hype, why this is becoming such an important area. I've been doing training on aged care to advisors for about 16 years now, trying to convince you all that this is the most important thing you could ever want to know about. But it's really probably been only in the last 5 years that we're starting to see, as far as business opportunities, that it is quite an interesting area and there are lots of opportunities. And we'll talk about the reasons why that's happening, what the advice process is. How do you actually go about giving advice in this space? Because it's all well and good to know the technical information, to know the fees inside out, to be able to calculate them all, but it's about when you've got a client in front of you, what's the process you follow? So what I want to do is give you a quick outline of a methodology and a formula for you to actually follow that, and then talk to you about your value proposition. And I think that's probably the thing that I find most advisors most interested in, just how do you articulate the value in this to a client? And so therefore, what can you charge for it? And what are the services you actually are going to provide? Because if you can't make it valuable to your business, then you're not going to bother doing this. And you're not going to be able to spend the time, and you're going to have to invest a bit of time and effort into building up your knowledge and your expertise and your tools around you to be able to cater for this area. So the aging population, this graph just shows starting from roughly today to 2050. And it's showing just the increase in some of the age segments of our population. The blue lines are looking at the population aged 65 to 84. And what it's looking at is the increase that we're starting with now, about 11.7% of the population aged 65 to 84. But by about 2050, that's actually going to increase up to 17.4%. I think 17.6. Okay, so just under 18%. So that's quite a big increase, not as significant as some other countries are experiencing. And we'll have a look and just see what the world trends are, because I think it's good to know what's happening and the challenges around the world. But you can see in Australia, we've definitely got aging population. We've had last month, the ABS put out some new life expectancy tables, and we can see by those life expectancy tables that we're increasing longevity, that clients' life expectancies on a statistical basis are increasing, and that's reflected in these graphs as well. The red bars are probably the most important sector from an aged care perspective, because they're the population over the age of 85. So we can see that that's going from about 1.8% today to 5.2% by the year 2050. That's a very big increase, and that is the fastest growing sector of our population, is at 85 plus. So we can see the story that we're telling clients about life expectancy, that they should be not thinking of just getting into their 80s. They really need to have a very realistic expectation and a high chance of living into their late 80s and possibly even living into their 90s. And that's reflected in these statistics and the projections around it as well. So the life expectancy for a 65-year-old gets them somewhere into their mid-80s, but remembering that they are only average life expectancies, so half your clients should expect to live beyond that age. And also the other thing is that they're based on historical data. They don't take into account the improvements in mortality over recent years. If you look at some of the Treasury adjusted figures that take into account those improvements, it's actually showing that life expectancy for a 65-year-old is more likely in the early 90s. So that's where your clients should be projecting. We've got longer life expectancies. What does that also mean though? It doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be able to live independently. We are finding that as people are aging, there's also the potential for them to have illnesses or disabilities or mental health issues is much higher, and so therefore their chances of needing care are increasing as well. So there's a much higher chance that your clients are going to live to older ages, and a much higher chance that they will need to have aged care at some point in their life than the previous generation of retirees. So that has some implications for how you do financial planning. Even if you go, I don't really care about aged care, which I'm assuming you're not saying because you are here, but even if you don't care so much about it, you've got to think about aged care is going to be a reality for a large percentage of your clients. So your pre-retiree clients and your early retirees, when you're thinking about how much money do they need to retire on, at what point in their retirement will they need access to income, at what point do they need access to capital, aged care has an impact on that. I think it's no longer necessarily appropriate where we've maybe done examples before with clients who think, when I retire I need $50,000, $60,000 to live on because I'm going to go out and have holidays and have a really good time and have lots of entertainment. But as I get older, I'll be either dead, so I won't need any, or sitting in a rocking chair in a nursing home and the government will pay for me so I don't need any money. I think that is a myth that we won't realise so much. Because if you don't have money, the aged care system is set up so if you have absolutely no assets and no income, you have got a right to get access to aged care and the government will pay for it, but you will lose control over whether you can get into a facility or not, which facility you can get into, what sort of room you'll have. So you lose access to all your choices and your control over those decisions. If you don't have any assets or you don't have any income, then you're going to rely on an aged care facility that's willing to take you, having a bed available, and that might be absolutely nowhere close to any of your family or friends or where you've lived. You may then need to find that they're going to put you in a shared room rather than your own private room. Okay? That's a reality of how we need to structure aged care to look after everybody, and that's the way the system does work. The biggest myth in aged care, I think, is that most people think it's a government provided service, like hospitals. They go, well, you know, the government pays for all these hospitals, it's there, I can get into hospitals. Now we know there's problems with that theory, but aged care even more so. Aged care is not government provided. What it is government subsidised. Big difference. Aged care is run by various organisations. You'll have church groups like the Catholic Church, the Uniting Church, Anglican Church, Salvation Army, they're all out there. They all have aged care facilities. So churches, charitable organisations, there are some government-run ones, there are some community-based ones, there are also ones run by private commercial operators as well. So they run the aged care facilities, but they are very expensive to run and most residents cannot afford to cover the costs themselves. So what the government does is subsidise it. And that's why we have a whole system of checks and balances for, can somebody move into aged care? Can the facility accept them? Because the government is paying a very large amount of money for each resident in aged care. So it's government subsidised, not government provided, which is why it's not necessarily true to say that you will absolutely get in even if you don't have money. Okay. Does anyone want to take a guess? Wild stab in the dark. How much do you think the government pays each year for each, potentially, what do you think the maximum they could pay for each resident in aged care? Wild stab in the dark. 35,000? 75? I'd be going closer to the 75. If you have a look at, there's certain amounts, when you go to aged care, there's a certain amount of income that a resident has to pay, and we'll talk about the fees, but potentially the government could also, on top of what a resident pays, the government could pay up to $78,000. So 75 is a very close guess. So potentially for every single resident, the government could pay up to 78. Now how much they pay does depend on how much the resident's paying. It will also depend on the health needs of that particular person. Somebody with low levels of care might be a lot less the government pays. The $78,000 will be paid by somebody who has nothing but the age pension and is at the highest high level of care. Okay, but that's potentially what they could pay. The resident at a minimum level is paying about $16,000 a year. But if you think about it, for a lot of those residents, where did they get their $16,000? The government. They got their age pension, so the government gave them the $20,000, they paid $16,000 to the aged care facility, and then the government paid the rest of it as well. So really, you could say it could be costing us up to $100,000 a year per person. It's an expensive system. And this is why one of the things they're looking at doing in the Productivity Commission report they did a couple of years ago now is looking at how do we get better access to services in the home. One of the other trends I'm seeing is that people are living longer. They're needing care a lot more in the later stages of their life. They're also often still married when they get to aged care. I know when I first started doing this, you'd say pretty much 90% of people in aged care facilities were widowed women. Now we're seeing a lot more men going into aged care. We're seeing people who are still married at the point they need care. And often that's because one's low care and one's high care. So the dynamics of the residents and their life situations is also changing a lot as well. And this is putting pressure on the budgets for the government and putting pressure on social structure and how we deal with it. So the government is looking, saying, well, if there's a lot more people who are still married and living as a couple, maybe we can look at, can we get better services into the home? And that might help address some of the issues with ageing. So right around the world, in Australia, this ageing demographic is causing issues from how the government funds it. So as a society, what our economic cost is. It's looking at society and structure of our social system and how we as a society look after our elderly. And it's also going to have, as it becomes more and more expensive and more people needing to access care, it is going to mean that the residents need to face the fact that they need to have access to capital and income to pay more of their way if they really want to have choices and control how they're going to live. Right around the world, this is a problem. So let's have a look at the world and just some of the things that are happening in other countries. Now, in Australia, I think we have a very affordable system. Once we get over the hurdle of, the biggest hurdle is just how you fund those bonds getting into aged care. We'll come back and talk about the bonds. That's the biggest hurdle. After that, it's all based on your income. Somebody who just gets the age pension will pay 85% of that amount as fees. Anybody who has higher levels of income, they might pay more, but it is all a percentage of your income. So it is affordable. If we look at in Germany, the costs of care in Germany, even though it's one of the best economies in Europe, is still becoming so unaffordable for retirees that they're moving. They're moving to Eastern European countries, they're moving to Thailand, where it's a lot cheaper to live. Can't really blame them. Germany, Thailand, nowhere I would be. But the cost of it is quite burdensome. It's about 3,000 euros a month over there for aged care. They do have an insurance system that pays roughly half of that, but it's still quite an expensive system, more so than ours. Japan has a massive ageing population. Our population over the age of 65 is just under 12%. They already have 25% of their population over the age of 65. They have 51,000 people, roughly around there anyway, who are over the age of 100. Okay? So a lot of letters from the Queen if they, well, I'm assuming their king probably writes some letters, I don't know. But 51,000 people already over the age of 100. So they show that this ageing population is a real phenomenon around the world. One of the things I loved about Japan was being a country really that loves its technology. They're looking at a lot of robots and robotic technology around how they can help people. And there was an article there about some robots, which I thought were brilliant. I was trying to work out how to get one to come and make me coffee in the morning. The one I loved most, though, were these robotic arms that you can put on, and you can lift things 5 times the weight that you normally would be able to. So I thought we'd have all these super grannies at the gym maybe, pulling weights, put you all to shame. But there's a lot of technology happening, and I even read an article this morning about what does the home for a retiree look like in 2050? And it nearly sounded like something out of the Jetsons. So it's a little bit of pie in the sky, but it's talking about all the things that we need to do from a structural way of helping people live in their own home, because that's where we need to go to a lot more. We need to look at getting people to be living in their own home and how we modify homes to look after people. China is having a big social experiment in more ways than one, but from them, this is a very big cultural change. That they currently have about, 9% of their population is over the age of 65. By 2040, that will increase up to 22%. So that's a big shift in a relatively short period of time. Some of their challenges are faced because of their single child policy and the shift from being in the rural areas to the urbanisation and the whole change in the way they live and the way they interact with each other. But this is having a problem because in Asia, typically, people didn't go to facilities, the family look after them, more so than in a lot of other countries, but the family look after them. But with a one-child policy, where you might have one child looking after two parents with several grandparents still alive as well, it actually breaks down the society structure of being able to look after the older generations. So what China is doing is we've got property developers allocating large blocks of land to trialling retirement villages. They haven't even got to the concept of aged care yet. They're just trialling retirement villages to see if people will accept moving into that sort of accommodation structure. And they need to deal with this. Now, again, we need to deal with a lot of these things as well about how we provide accommodation for our older people, but more so in some of those countries. Nigeria was fantastic. Nigeria and their scams are abounding here. They've got this system which they've dubbed hustle and bustle, where the Nigerians are effectively just ripping off their elderly people. So just looking at scams for how they get money out of the elderly into their own bank accounts. Great system. I think everyone else has got their email scams down pat, and so they've ignored them. New Zealand, bring it a little bit closer to home. New Zealand has interesting opportunities for us as well, and interesting implications. They have currently, their population over the age of 65, over the next 20 years, will nearly double. So if you take all the people in New Zealand over the age of 65, it will increase by about 84% over the next 20 years. So that's a really rapid change and increase. The other thing that's accompanied by, where are all the younger New Zealanders? They're here. Okay, so big challenges for them. So they've got an ageing population that are left over there. The kids a lot of them have come here. So those kids are potentially your clients. There's something like 400,000 or 500,000 New Zealanders living in Australia. So some of those have got to be your clients, who are also going to, when you're dealing with financial planning, I want to talk about the younger clients as well, who potentially you will have issues and you'll be providing advice to them, and they're going to have to deal with trying to sort out aged care for parents that aren't even close to them, who are in a different country, and that will have financial impacts as well as personal impact for themselves as well. So there's an opportunity in that space to actually be helping and providing advice to them. We've done a little bit of work to have a look and see, well, how different is the New Zealand aged care system? Their social security is a bit different. Their aged care system, there are some differences, different language and terminology, not that dissimilar to ours. So it's an area we're looking at doing a bit of research on, because we do think you're going to come across situations where you might want to provide advice to them as well. The other trends, so there is this ageing population, and as the ageing population ages, you will come across more and more people where there's an opportunity to talk about aged care. The other thing to note is already it's a big market. There is 1 million people in Australia who are already today accessing aged care services. Okay, so if you didn't think it was a big percentage, that's a lot. They are not all in aged care facilities. Only 215,000 of those live in an aged care facility. Now the reason why, does anyone know why it's 215,000 people and not more? It's because that's what the government funds. the government look at the population over the age of 70 and they say, let's provide aged care places for about 10% of that population. So just because there's only 215,000 living in aged care doesn't mean that's all that actually need help, which is why we've got a whole lot of other services that they might be bringing in, things like Meals on Wheels and community nursing, other support mechanisms. So it might just be isolated things that they can bring into the home. All of those have a budgetary issue and a cost issue for your clients, don't they? So if they're going to bring it in, it might be a small cost, but there's still a cost. They don't need aged care or they can't get into aged care, they may need to allow in their personal budgets that there's money to pay for those services. That's going to impact on how you set up their financial plans. The other thing to note is that about 85% of all care in Australia at the moment is provided by informal carers. So that means the person's spouse who's living with them, kids who may or may not be living with them. They're probably living, maybe they've all gone to New Zealand. Somebody has to live there. They may, so it may be sort of people like that. It may just be friends, family, other volunteers in the community. But that's an awful lot of time by volunteers. And you've got to think about at what cost does that come to those people. In Canada, the research I was reading on that one was showing that of baby boomers are losing about 1.5 million work days a year in care obligations for somebody else. It's a lot of days for just the baby boomers. Now that's not necessarily an older person, that might be care for parents, it might be care for children, it might be care for spouses, so it didn't unfortunately break it down any further than that. But it does just show that if you have responsibilities to look after somebody who needs some care, that may impact you not just in your own personal time but financially. I want to come back and explore that in a moment. Okay, so we've got all these things which are saying more and more of your clients are going to need your help. It is a complex area, but there's a logical process for how to unravel and create the solutions. And there's financial impacts all along the way about just what sort of care you need, how you pay for it, about having the choices and the rights and the opportunities that you want, and the impacts on everybody else around you. So we need to start thinking about those. So even if at the very base level of all you're doing is talking to your pre-retiree clients about, you need to make sure you've got money throughout your whole lifespan, right into your 90s, to pay for either your living expenses or your care needs. That's going to be important. I think more and more people need to be prepared that the house that they are living in, when they no longer need to live in the house, that needs to be converted to some format of aged care. And they need to accept that option as well. Come back and talk about that too. Are you finding these sorts of issues concerning your clients yet? A little bit? Is it concerning you now? Hopefully, that's great. You can all go and have a drink now. Oh no, another hour and a half to go. So, opportunities to think about. If this is your client base, so if you, every day you get clients that walk in your door that look like this, you cannot ignore aged care. You have to at least know the basics. You have to at least know where to refer them to get help. Okay, so absolute minimum. Great that you're here because you'll have an understanding of how to help them at least approach it as well. Because these are the sorts of people that will be moving into aged care. Average age is 82 to about 84,000. 82 to 84 is the average age of somebody moving into care. Okay, so these are your clients here. Now, in reality, those of you who did some aged care for clients, were these your clients? Were these the people that came in and said, how do I pay the fees? I've got to move to aged care. How do I pay the fees? Should I sell my house or should I keep it? It's the kids. It's always the kids. In all these 16 years that I've been doing aged care, these are the people that we're concerned about. And these are the people that we need to help. And you're right, they may be your clients. So they may be your clients, but they are not the ones that you're going to ring up and say, hey, by the way, these guys. Okay? So every time I have ever had anybody say to me, how does aged care work? What are my fees going to be? They look more like this. Probably not quite like that. So my friends are great. I get to see them all the time and we talk about aged care a lot. because they're all trying to figure out how to help their parents. A lot of my friends live overseas, their parents are here. And those sorts of things are really difficult to deal with as well. We've got the families that are just spread geographically. We've got families that are busy, everybody's busy. Even if you live close to the parents, if it's in the city, it still might take you an hour to get there every day and an hour to come back in the time you're there. It all has an impact for the families that we need to factor in. How do we deal with it? And just being aware of it. Doesn't mean we don't do it, but it just means we need to make sure our plans are set up to take into account those factors. So these are the sorts of guys. So if you have clients, so two things. If you have clients that look like this, definitely you need to know about aged care. But be prepared for the fact that it's going to be their kids that are the ones that are eventually going to come and ask you about the questions. So wouldn't it be great if you already knew the kids and had a relationship started with them? It's an opportunity in everything with aged care. It is an opportunity to help these clients that you've had on the books for a long time and you want to help them through that next phase. But it's also a great opportunity to see if you can start in a true advice process, getting to know the kids and getting to help them understand that you're there, you're willing to help them, you know what you're doing, and that they can come and see you. So it also might be in that whole process, you might even pick them up as clients as well. So there's a whole layer of helping the person who needs the help, but it's the networking and marketing into the wider family that's going to offer the biggest value to your business as well. And I think there's lots of opportunities in there. So this is what we're looking at doing. Sell or keep the home, how to pay the bond. What are the issues that they need to think about to make that decision? What strategies can you add to improve the situation? And then the estate planning overlay. And I'll show you an example in a minute of the estate planning. One of the things that I think you want to look at is in all of this. Okay, so your question is, you can see big market for this. There is lots of opportunity for you. There's also a lot of work. So how do you get paid? In a lot of cases, and this is where you need to look at that, what you are doing is there's this defined series of things that you can do for your clients, and you need to be looking at charging a fee for service. So if you're going to go through and do that calculation of sell, keep the home, put together a plan on strategies, help them work through, maybe even having a family meeting, you want to define what you are going to do for the client, what their expectation of the outcome should be, and how much you're going to charge. I know I've seen a lot of planners that will charge $1,500 for it. I think that is way too low. You're not really recovering anything for your time on doing that. So $1,500 to about $3,500 seems to be fairly standard range. I think it's too low. I think you should be looking more like the $3,000-5,000 at least for these fees. The other thing you've got to look at is what's the value you're adding. Same thing of think about how a solicitor works. If you've got a problem, you go along to a solicitor, they will say, well, what's your scenario? What are you trying to achieve? They'll help you work out how you can go about creating a solution. They'll help you make choices. They never tell you this is exactly what you do. It's always what do you want to do, and they help guide you through the process. They will help you avoid, they'll identify saying, if we do that, these are the other problems we have. Here's some solutions to avoid those. Okay, so solicitors, that's what they do. They take you through an advice process of, here's the pathway, here's the decision points, and help you make decisions, identify the pitfalls, and help you come up with solutions on how to get the best outcome to avoid the negatives. And what do they do at the end of all of that? Give you a big bill. And what do? Pay it. Same thing in this scenario. Now you may find that in this whole place as well, that there might be other opportunities that might be part of your ongoing service. Agnes might have been your client for a while and you're doing a certain amount as part of your ongoing service, but I think where you're doing the financial modelling, that's always a separate piece of work, there's a separate fee for that. It might be that you're using it as an opportunity to leverage in and get the kids to come across, once they can see the professionalism of what you do, the value of your advice, they can become very good clients that you might bring on for a whole range of other business. So it might be a bit of a leader into that. But again, you should be charging for the advice you're doing. Also showing you where you're adding value, that estate planning side. This was a case study we did do for a client where Jean, not her real name, was 65 and Bill, not his real name, was 85. They owned a house together and it was a joint asset. But other than that house, Bill really had nothing left. Jean earned a lot of money. She was on a very good salary. She also had some board appointments. And so she had income of $175,000, which meant he didn't get any social security. He'd used up all his savings. She was basically supporting him. Kids from previous marriages on both sides watching very, very closely what was happening. What they had to do is he had Alzheimer's, quite progressed. So he had lost legal mental capacity. He needed to go into a low care facility with a $400,000 bond. Now they wanted to do whatever it took to get him into there because it was just around the corner from her. So that was important for them. So the $400,000 bond was what they needed to pay. The biggest issue she had was not how to pay the bond. Now, and again, in this case, we wouldn't go through sell the home, keep the home, because she needs to live in the home. The only option she had was, could you borrow against the house? Which the house wasn't worth enough to be able to borrow. She's 65, she was only going to be able to borrow about 20%. She could have taken the money out of her self-managed super fund to pay it, but if she gives up work and she's 65, there's a chance once it's out, it's always out, and that may not be a great situation for her. But her biggest concern was not how she pays it or could she get a better pension or anything like that. Two things she wanted to know. Could she give up work and still afford it? So we went through and did the calculations on that. But more importantly, if she gave him the $400,000, which was then his bond and part of his estate, what she didn't want was that if she died first, he was inheriting the house and his kids got the house, and his kids also got her $400,000 bond. Her kids got nothing. So what we looked at was how else could she deal with this? So this is worth, this is a valuable thing. How many of your clients that are older in second marriages with kids watching what's happening? What we ended up doing and she chose to do was, even though she probably could have paid the bond, she didn't. She did it as periodic payments, which just meant while he was alive, she was funding the interest costs. When he dies, the interest costs stop and there was no transfer of assets across estates. That worked much better for them. So that's why I said, you've always got to look at the financial things, but that estate planning can sometimes be so much more important. So it's about you. But hopefully what we've done is gone through and just sort of looked at the opportunity. And there is good opportunity. There is lots of value. Don't limit the value to just what fees you can save and what extra age pension you can get. It's about the avoiding the pitfalls and the estate planning and the creation of solutions.